When I found the ad for the couch on Craigslist, it seemed like a great deal. The price was well below what I expected to pay, and the photos showed a piece of furniture in great condition. I was moving into a new house and saving money was crucial. I contacted the seller, a man named Darren, who seemed helpful, although a bit too insistent. He was determined to deliver the couch personally, which made me a little suspicious, but his initial friendliness put my concerns to rest. On the day of delivery, Darren arrived on time, but his behavior seemed odd. As he unloaded the couch from the truck, he looked around my house, his eyes scanning the windows and doors in a way that made me uncomfortable. It was almost as if he was memorizing the details. At first, I thought it was just my paranoia, but the way he spoke about the couch, as if he was attached to it, bothered me. "If you change your mind, I can buy the couch back," he said suddenly as he pushed the furniture through the living room door. "Just give me a call, you know? Sometimes people regret it." That offer sounded out of the ordinary. Who regrets buying a couch? I smiled politely, thanked him, and said I was happy with the purchase, but that conversation kept echoing in my head. After Darren left, I stood staring at the couch for a few minutes. It was beautiful, comfortable, but there was something about it, something I couldn't identify, something that made me feel a slight unease, like a shadow passing quickly at the corner of my eye. The unease lingered in the days that followed. As I got used to the house, I began to notice small things. The couch, in particular, always seemed to be in my line of sight, as if somehow it dominated the living room. And then came the smell, a subtle, almost imperceptible odor that intensified every time I sat there. It was like the smell of something old, musty, hidden deep within the upholstery. At night, when the house was silent, I heard strange noises coming from the living room. It was as if something was moving, but when I turned on the lights, everything was in place. I kept wondering if it was just the normal sounds of a new house, or maybe my mind playing tricks on me. But then, on a Wednesday afternoon, I got a call from Darren. He got straight to the point, no small talk. "I really think I need the couch back," he said. His voice was filled with urgency he hadn't shown before. "Something happened, and it's better if you let me take it back today." That call left me unsettled. Why would someone be so desperate to retrieve an old couch? I politely refused, but the discomfort grew. Something was deeply wrong with this situation, and I had no idea what was coming next. That night, the tension that had been building for days finally reached its peak. I went to bed early, trying to shake off the growing sense of unease that had settled over me since Darren's call. I tried to convince myself it was just paranoia, but I couldn't forget the urgency in his voice. Around 3 in the morning, I was awakened by a loud noise. At first, I thought it was just the wind knocking something outside, but as I adjusted in the darkness, I heard the sound of something heavy falling in the living room. The couch, the sound of fabric being torn. My heart started to race. I slowly got out of bed, without turning on the lights, trying not to make any noise. I grabbed my phone and, with light steps, went to the bedroom door. The hallway was dark, but faint moonlight filtered through the living room curtains. And that's when I saw them. There were 2 people, dressed in black, kneeling around the couch. They were cutting the upholstery with knives, tearing it frantically as if they were looking for something specific hidden inside. I froze. Fear paralyzed me for a moment, but soon I snapped out of it. I locked the bedroom door and ran to the kitchen, where I hid. My mind was racing. Who were these people? What were they looking for? The image of them cutting the couch, desperate, was terrifying. I knew I needed to do something, but the fear kept me rooted in place. In the kitchen, breathing heavily and with my heart pounding, I realized I was in a desperate situation. With no idea what to do, I remembered the dog that was in the backyard. Zeus, my German shepherd, was big and fierce when needed. He could be my only chance to scare off the intruders. Trying to stay calm, I went to the door leading to the backyard. I could hear the intruders in the back of the house, the sound of fabric tearing mixed with hurried footsteps. They were completely focused on their goal, whatever it was. With a quick motion, I unlocked the kitchen door and let Zeus inside. As soon as he entered, his demeanor changed. He immediately caught the scent of strangers in the house, and a deep growl escaped his throat. I didn't need to say anything else. Zeus ran toward the living room with explosive force, the sound of his paws echoing across the floor. Chaos ensued. The intruders let out surprised screams and tried to retreat, but it was too late. I couldn't see exactly what was happening, but I could hear the sounds of the struggle, the fierce growl of Zeus, objects being knocked over, and the frantic sound of footsteps heading for the front door. When I finally gathered the courage to leave the kitchen, I saw the front door wide open. The intruders had fled, but not before taking something from the couch. The fabric was torn, and there was an empty space, as if something important had been removed. I stood there, breathless, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Still panting, my body trembling from the adrenaline, I decided to call the police. I didn't know exactly what had happened or what those people wanted, but breaking into my house in the middle of the night was enough for a report. Zeus stood by my side, still restless, sniffing the floor near the torn couch as if he could still smell the intruders who had just fled. Minutes later, the red and blue lights of the patrol car lit up the front of my house. 2 officers came in with serious expressions, observing the destroyed couch and the marks left by the break-in. I tried to explain what had happened as best I could, but the more I told it, the more absurd it seemed. An insistent seller, a used couch, and now a mysterious break-in. They listened to me, but their looks revealed what they didn't want to say. It all seemed a little hard to believe. One of the officers examined the couch more closely. "Looks like they were searching for something inside," he commented, pointing to the rips in the upholstery and the messed-up lining. "Any idea what it could be?" I shook my head, completely confused. I don't know. I only bought the couch a few days ago. I have no idea what was inside." They continued to examine the couch, but found nothing. The intruders had taken whatever had been hidden there. When they finished their initial investigation, one of the officers handed me a card with instructions for any further emergencies. When they left, I stood in the middle of the living room, staring at the destroyed couch. There was something much darker going on here than I had imagined, and the thought that something dangerous had been in my home without me knowing haunted me. Zeus stayed by my side, vigilant, as if he knew the danger wasn't over. In the days that followed, the destroyed couch remained in my living room, a constant reminder of that night. I wanted to get rid of it, but I didn't know where to start. Every time I looked at it, a wave of discomfort washed over me. The silence in the house seemed heavier than before. What had those intruders taken? What had been hidden in the couch the whole time? While I sat on it so comfortably, I called Darren, the seller, intending to ask if he knew anything. His phone went straight to voicemail, and an automatic message informed me that the number was no longer in service. A chill ran down my spine. This was all too strange to be a coincidence. And the more I thought about it, the more a sense of paranoia started to creep in. I tried to forget the incident, get back to my routine, but the image of the intruders tearing apart the couch and Darren's insistence on getting it back haunted me. The strange smell that had permeated the couch still seemed to linger in the air, even after the couch was dragged to the yard, waiting to be collected by the trash. Days later, the sense of relief I had hoped for never came. The couch had been taken away, but the void it left in the living room seemed to carry the weight of everything I still didn't know. At night, I still woke up to small noises, as if something was moving through the house. Zeus, normally calm, spent more time on guard, as if something was still out there. I never found out what the intruders took. The police found no more clues, and Darren, the seller, had vanished without a trace. Part of me wanted answers, wanted to understand what had been inside the couch, what made it so important to those men. But at the same time, the fear of what I might discover kept me from digging any deeper. The mystery of the couch remained, now just a shadow in my memory, but vivid enough to remind me that not everything we bring into our homes is as harmless as it seems. And maybe, somewhere, someone else is sitting on a similar couch, unaware of what might be hidden beneath the fabric and foam. I was casually browsing Craigslist one evening when I stumbled upon what seemed like a deal too good to be true. A used car at an absurdly low price. The title of the ad grabbed my attention right away. 2010 Honda Accord, unbeatable price. The picture showed a vehicle in great condition, without any visible signs of wear and tear. It felt like I'd struck gold. Since I'd recently started a new job and desperately needed a reliable mode of transportation, this seemed like the perfect solution to my problem. And given my tight budget, I wasn't about to let this opportunity slip away. Without wasting any time, I contacted the seller. A guy named Tom answered the call, and while he sounded friendly enough, he spoke in a rushed tone, like he was eager to get the deal over with. "It's a solid car. I just need to sell it quickly due to personal reasons," he explained. I didn't press for more details. We agreed to meet the next day so I could check out the car in person. When I arrived at the public parking lot where we had arranged to meet, Tom was already there, standing beside the Honda. The first inspection didn't reveal anything alarming. The car seemed to be in excellent shape, the paint job was immaculate, and the engine sounded smooth when I turned it on. Tom, however, kept glancing around nervously, like he couldn't wait to be somewhere else. It was weird, but I brushed it off. In less than an hour, I had the keys in my hand and was driving the car home, feeling pretty good about my purchase. But as I cruised through the quiet streets of my neighborhood, something started to feel off. A faint metallic smell seemed to linger in the air inside the car. It wasn't overpowering, but it was there. I told myself it was probably nothing, a trick of my mind, or maybe just the old car smell. Still, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that crept in as I drove. "It's fine," I muttered to myself. After all, I'd scored a great deal, right? The first few days with the car were pretty uneventful. I used it to get to work and run errands, and it seemed to handle everything just fine. But that faint metallic smell I'd noticed earlier was still there, lurking in the background, almost like it was following me. I even bought one of those cheap air fresheners and hung it from the rearview mirror, hoping that would take care of the problem. It didn't. The smell persisted, like an unwelcome guest. Then one night, after leaving work late, I noticed something that made my stomach turn. As I shone a flashlight into the back seat, I saw dark stains on the fabric. They weren't large, but they were definitely there. How did I miss this before? I wondered, feeling a chill run down my spine. I tried scrubbing at the stains with a damp cloth, but they wouldn't come out. It was like they were etched into the material, maybe from something long ago. That night, I told my friend Mike about the smell and the stains. The next day, he came over to take a look. "Dude, you're overreacting," he said with a nervous laugh, inspecting the marks. "It's probably just spilled soda or something. Not a big deal." But I wasn't so sure. Something about the whole situation felt wrong. The smell, the stains, they were starting to get under my skin. I kept thinking about the guy who sold me the car. He'd seemed so eager to get rid of it, and that nervous energy he had. Did he know about this? I couldn't shake the thought. Something wasn't adding up. That's when I decided to look into the car's history. Maybe I was just being paranoid, but deep down, I had this nagging feeling that the car had a past I wasn't going to like. And the more I thought about it, the more I couldn't ignore it. A few days later, my unease about the car had only grown. The stains on the back seats wouldn't stop bothering me, and the smell seemed to be getting stronger. Determined to figure out what was going on, I decided to do a more thorough cleaning. I grabbed some tools and started lifting the carpets and removing parts of the trunk lining, where the smell seemed the strongest. That's when I found it, a piece of clothing tucked underneath the lining in the trunk. It was folded up, but the stains on it were unmistakable. Blood. My stomach flipped, and I felt my pulse quicken as I stepped back, nearly dropping the tools in my hand. The blood was dried and old, but the shock of seeing it hit me like a punch to the gut. I stood there for what felt like forever, just staring at the bloody fabric, trying to wrap my head around what it meant. My first instinct was to toss it and pretend I hadn't seen anything, but I couldn't. Something kept me rooted to the spot, staring at the evidence that something horrible had happened involving this car. This can't be real, I whispered to myself. Eventually, I pulled out my phone and took a few pictures of the blood-stained clothing. I thought about going to the police, but fear held me back. What if I was getting myself involved in something way bigger than I could handle? The more I thought about it, the more terrified I became. That night, I barely slept. I couldn't stop thinking about what I had found. The car, once a great deal that solved my transportation problems, now felt like a heavy burden. A reminder that I'd stumbled into something dark, something I didn't yet understand. The next morning, I woke up with an overwhelming sense of dread. The car sat in the garage, and I couldn't stop thinking about the bloody clothes I had found. I knew I had to do something, but fear kept me paralyzed. That's when my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "I know what you found. Return the car, or you'll regret it." I froze. The message was short, but the threat was crystal clear. Who was behind this? The seller? Someone else who knew the car's dark history? My heart raced, and panic set in. How did they know I had found the clothes? Was someone watching me? I looked around my house, feeling exposed and vulnerable. In a moment of desperation, I decided to go to the police. I brought the bloody clothes with me and showed the text message to the officer on duty. But the response I got was far from reassuring. "Sir, without more concrete evidence, there's not much we can do. A text message and an old piece of clothing aren't enough to start an investigation." I left the station feeling more helpless than ever. The police wouldn't help, and now I knew someone was after me. The messages kept coming, each one more threatening than the last. I felt like a target, and the fear was starting to take over. That night, when I went outside to grab something from the car, I saw it, scratched into the windshield in deep, jagged letters. "Return." I stumbled back, my heart pounding in my chest. This wasn't just a threat anymore. Whoever was behind this wasn't messing around, and I was running out of time. After seeing the word "return" scratched into my windshield, panic took hold of me. I rushed back inside, locking the door and peering through the curtains, half expecting someone to be lurking in the shadows. My mind raced, trying to figure out what to do next. I called Mike, hoping he'd take things more seriously this time, but his reaction was the same. "Man, you're blowing this out of proportion," he said. "It's probably just some random vandal. It doesn't mean the car's involved in anything criminal." But I couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just random vandalism. The isolation was starting to get to me. No one believed me, and I felt like I was in this alone. And the messages? They kept coming, one after another, reminding me that someone was watching. The next few days were a blur. I avoided leaving the house as much as I could. Every time I got near the car, the smell seemed to get stronger, and the stains on the back seat looked darker, more menacing. I couldn't stand to be near it, but I knew I couldn't just ignore it either. One night, I heard something outside. Footsteps, maybe. I peeked through the window, my heart racing, and saw someone standing by the car. They were just standing there, looking at it, looking at me. I froze, too scared to move. Whoever they were, they knew where I lived. They were getting closer. I watched from the window, paralyzed, as they eventually walked away, disappearing into the night. I knew then that things were only going to get worse, and I didn't know how much longer I had before the threats became something far more dangerous. The deeper I dug, the more disturbing details I uncovered. The car had changed hands multiple times over the years, but one of the previous owners stood out, a man with a criminal record for assault and drug-related charges. I felt my stomach tighten as I scrolled through his file. This guy wasn't just some petty criminal. He had deep connections to some seriously shady figures. What really made my blood run cold, though, was discovering his ties to the local police. There were whispers online about corruption within the department, and this guy's name came up more than once. Suddenly, it made sense why the cops at the station had been so dismissive of my report. They were protecting him. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. I wasn't just dealing with some random criminal. I was tangled in something much bigger, something that could get me killed. I knew I couldn't trust the local authorities anymore. If the police were involved, I had no one left to turn to. The isolation I'd felt before now seemed suffocating, but I wasn't about to give up. I needed to get the word out, find someone who wasn't tied to this mess. That's when I remembered the independent journalist I'd read about. He'd been investigating corruption in small-town police forces for years. If anyone would listen, it was him. I found his contact info online and sent him an email detailing everything I knew. It was a risk, reaching out like that, but I was out of options. I needed help, and I needed it fast. The messages kept coming, but now I felt like I had a target on my back. Every noise outside my house sent my heart racing. I hadn't slept in days. I knew the danger was closing in, and it was only a matter of time before the threats turned into something worse. It happened on a warm, suffocating night. I'd been sitting in my living room, too on edge to sleep, when I heard it, a faint metallic noise outside. My stomach dropped. I jumped up and looked through the window, my heart pounding. There he was, the previous owner of the car, standing next to it, staring directly at my house. My blood ran cold. Before I could react, I heard the sound of the back door creaking open. He was inside. I scrambled into the kitchen, my hands shaking as I grabbed the first thing I could find, a screwdriver. My breathing was ragged, and fear coursed through my veins as I heard him moving through the house, calmly, like he wasn't in a hurry, like he knew exactly what he was doing. "I told you to return the car, Jake," he said, his voice low, a chilling calm to it. "You don't know what you're getting into." I backed up, gripping the screwdriver tighter. "You're not getting away with this," I said, though my voice wavered. He laughed, a deep, mocking sound, and then he lunged. The fight was quick and brutal. I managed to stab him with the screwdriver, but not before he slammed me into the wall, knocking the wind out of me. Pain shot through my back, but I didn't stop. Bleeding and disoriented, I shoved past him, running for the side door. I burst outside, screaming for help, while he stumbled into the shadows, disappearing into the night. I collapsed on the grass, clutching my side, gasping for air. He was gone, but I knew this wasn't over. I needed to act, and fast. I grabbed my phone and, with trembling hands, called the journalist. I told him everything. It was time to expose the truth, no matter the cost. Over the next few days, the pieces began to fall into place. With the journalist's help, the truth came out. The man who had attacked me was part of a criminal ring that used stolen cars for all kinds of illegal activity, from drug trafficking to violent crimes. The car I had bought had been involved in more than one of these crimes, and the previous owner was desperate to get rid of any evidence that could tie him to those events. The journalist, already deep into his investigation of police corruption, used my story to bring the case to light. The local media picked it up, and soon enough, the pressure on the authorities was too great to ignore. The man was arrested, and the full extent of his criminal operations was uncovered. But even with him behind bars, I didn't feel safe. The fear, the paranoia, it didn't go away. I'd spent days feeling like I was being watched, hunted, and that feeling wasn't easy to shake. Every sound outside still sent a jolt of panic through me, and I couldn't stop looking over my shoulder. I sold the car as soon as I could. I didn't want it around, didn't want the reminder of everything that had happened. But the memories were harder to get rid of. The stains on the seats, the smell in the air. They lingered in my mind like ghosts. I had survived, but not without scars. Physically, I was healing, but mentally, I wasn't sure I'd ever be the same. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face. I heard his voice, his threats, and even though the car was gone, I couldn't help but feel that the past was still chasing me. I was about to embark on another work trip, the kind of trip I did frequently, meaning that, once again, I needed someone to take care of my dogs, Max and Bella. They were always good with strangers, but still, I had my reservations about leaving my home and my pets in the hands of someone I barely knew. That's when I decided to hire a sitter through a popular app. Ethan's reviews were impeccable, and the conversation we had over the phone reinforced that good impression. He seemed to be the meticulous type, which gave me some peace of mind. On the day I left, I showed him the basic instructions: the dog's food, walk schedules, where their favorite toys were. He seemed to absorb everything with an almost exaggerated attention, as if each detail were crucial. While I finished packing, Ethan stood at the door, watching everything attentively. "I'm sure they'll be in good hands," he said, with a reassuring smile. I smiled back, grateful, and with one last look at my dogs, who were already excited with the new visitor, I walked out the door. The days away passed quickly, and soon I was on my way back home. I hadn't thought much about what was happening while I was gone. Ethan had been sending regular updates, pictures of the dogs running around the yard, and notes about their routines. Everything seemed under control. When I finally got home, the relief of being back didn't last long. Max and Bella came running to greet me, but there was something different about them. It was hard to explain. They seemed less excited, more cautious. I shook my head, trying to push away the feeling that something was wrong, telling myself it was just the effect of being away for a few days. As I walked through the house, the first thing I noticed was the smell. There was a faint scent that didn't belong to me. It was hard to identify, but enough to make me uncomfortable. I headed to the bedroom and found my bed unmade, something I definitely didn't remember leaving that way before I left. The sheet was tossed around oddly, and as I got closer, I caught the same strange smell. An unsettling feeling began to grow. It must just be in my head, I murmured to myself, trying to dispel the idea that something was out of place. But as I moved down the hallway toward the bathroom, another unexpected clue appeared. The mirror was foggy, as if someone had just taken a shower. My stomach churned. The last thing I wanted to believe was that Ethan, the sitter I had hired, could have used my things while I was gone. I tried not to think about it as I took care of the dogs, but as the night wore on, the doubt began to fixate in my mind. After all, who else could it be? I was trying to ignore it, but the signs were there, and the idea that someone had crossed the line began to haunt me. In the days following my return, the uncomfortable feelings didn't go away. In fact, they seemed to intensify. First, it was a shirt I had worn before the trip. I always kept it in the same place, at the bottom of the drawer, but now it was gone. I thought maybe I had misplaced it, but I couldn't find it anywhere. Then, a book that had been on my bedside table was missing. It wasn't valuable, but it was my favorite book, and I knew exactly where I had left it. The discomfort grew even more when I noticed that small items in the kitchen were also out of place. Missing utensils, glasses I didn't remember using. I spent days wondering if it was just my mind playing tricks on me, as if my memory was failing after the trip. But every time I came across something that seemed wrong, the feeling that something was truly off grew stronger. Then I started noticing my dog's behavior. Max and Bella, always playful and sociable, were acting strange. Max seemed suspicious, following me around the house like he was worried. Bella, on the other hand, spent most of her time in a corner of the living room, something unusual for her. That's when I seriously started to consider that Ethan might be involved. Even with these suspicions, Ethan continued to send me friendly messages. He asked if the dogs were doing well and said he missed them. His words, which once reassured me, now made me deeply uncomfortable. It was as if he was trying to maintain a connection that I no longer wanted. Something about him seemed wrong. The weeks dragged on, and the feeling of being watched started to take over. Small changes in the house began to bother me more. Things like the couch being slightly out of position, or a chair that I was sure I hadn't left turned that way. At first, I thought I might be overreacting, but when you add everything up, it was clear that something very strange was happening. That's when I decided to check the home security system. Although I had never felt the need to review the footage before, now it seemed necessary. I opened the app and began reviewing the days I had been away, expecting to see the dogs playing or Ethan feeding them as promised. But what I found was much more disturbing. During the times when I knew he should have been in the house, the cameras were off. The footage was cut at specific moments, as if someone had deliberately paused the system. My blood ran cold. How could this have happened? I had never given him permission to mess with the cameras. And yet, the records were blank just when he was supposed to be there. My mind began racing with possibilities. Did he know more about my house than I thought? What else could he have done while I was gone? And worse, he still had the door code. I hadn't changed it since I returned. Panic started to creep in, and I decided it was time to ask Ethan some direct questions. I sent a message asking about the cameras, trying to sound as calm as possible. His response was quick but vague. Oh, maybe it was a system glitch. That happens sometimes. But I knew it wasn't just a glitch. Something deeper was going on, and I needed to find out what it was. After Ethan's evasive response, something inside me broke. I could no longer ignore the signs, and every minute that passed, my distrust grew. I knew I had to dig deeper. That's when I decided to investigate Ethan's past. I quickly searched the internet, hoping not to find anything too concerning, but what popped up on the screen made my stomach turn. He had been accused before of obsessive behavior with a former client. The woman claimed he had spied on her and used her things without permission. She even filed a lawsuit, but the case was dropped due to lack of evidence. It was as if Ethan knew exactly how to avoid getting caught. From that moment, everything began to make sense. The missing objects, the disabled cameras, the change in my dog's behavior, it all added up. He had done this before, and he was probably doing it again, but this time with me. And then came the question that haunted me even more. Was he still coming to my house without me knowing? Could he be using the door code to come in while I was out, or even while I was asleep? The idea that he might be watching me, that he knew so much about my routine, terrified me. My mind could no longer rest. I had to do something, but at the same time, the thought of confronting him sent chills down my spine. What would he do if he found out I knew? I had to be careful. I had to find a way to expose him without putting myself in more danger. I knew I couldn't just accuse him without proof. Confronting him directly could also be dangerous. So, I came up with a plan. I needed to make him talk, to trap Ethan. I arranged a meeting with him at my house, saying I wanted to discuss something about the dogs and ask for some advice. He agreed without hesitation, as if he had nothing to fear. Before he arrived, I prepared everything. I hid my phone in a strategic spot to record the conversation, camouflaged among the couch cushions. My goal was to get a confession, something I could take to the authorities. But more than that, I wanted to see his reaction. I wanted to observe every move, every word, to try to figure out how much he knew about me and my home. When he arrived, he seemed completely at ease, as if it was just another friendly visit. We sat down and chatted casually for a few minutes, but I was nervous, my heart racing. I started asking about his experience as a pet sitter, and he responded with the same friendly tone as always. But when I started asking more specific questions, about the time he spent at my house, about the cameras that failed, about the missing objects, something changed in his expression. He hesitated but kept the smile. Oh, about the cameras. Yeah, sometimes they can glitch. Nothing wrong with that. But his voice faltered, and at that moment, I knew he was lying. Ethan was hiding something, and this conversation was the perfect opportunity to capture the truth. As Ethan tried to maintain his composure, I felt the fear turning into anger. He was sitting in my house, lying blatantly to my face, and that only fueled my determination. I kept pushing, asking questions he clearly didn't want to answer. Every word he said seemed carefully calculated, but for a brief moment, he let something slip that made me freeze. He mentioned a detail about my bedroom decor, something he shouldn't have known. I had never mentioned that item to anyone, and it was in a discreet spot, far from the usual walk through the house. It was at that moment that I realized he knew much more than I had imagined. My mouth went dry, but I managed to keep a neutral expression. I continued the conversation as if nothing had happened. but inside, I was on high alert. The hidden recorder captured every word, and I knew that veiled confession would be enough to take to the authorities. However, when I finally decided to confront him directly, something unexpected happened. Ethan looked at me with a smile that sent a shiver down my spine. You know, Emily, sometimes people like to control what they can't have. But it doesn't always work that way, does it? His words were soft, but the implicit threat was clear. I knew at that moment that confronting him could be dangerous. He didn't seem to care about the consequences, as if he knew there was nothing I could do to stop him. That's when I made the hardest decision. I needed to get out of there. As much as I wanted revenge, my safety came first. That very night, I decided it was time to leave everything behind. There was no other choice. The feeling of vulnerability, of being constantly watched, was unbearable. I called the police and showed them the recording, but I knew the legal system didn't always work as it should. Ethan would probably be questioned, maybe even arrested for a short time, but soon enough, he'd be free again. And I couldn't risk staying there. Within days, I found a new house in another town. It was smaller and simpler, but it gave me a sense of a fresh start. Slowly, I began to rebuild a routine, though the trauma of everything that had happened still clung to me. I felt paranoid, always looking over my shoulder, but I knew I had to move on. For a while, everything seemed calm. Days passed, and I began to believe that maybe, finally, I was safe. However, that peace was abruptly shattered when I received an anonymous letter at my new house. My heart raced the moment I saw the familiar handwriting on the envelope. I opened the letter with trembling hands, and there it was, a simple message. I'm still around. My body froze in fear. It was as if Ethan had found me again, as if he knew exactly where I was. All my efforts to escape seemed in vain. The psychological terror he had planted in me was still alive, and I knew the feeling of being watched wouldn't go away anytime soon. The letter made me realize that, although I had tried to start over, the nightmare was far from over. And now, I was trapped in a cycle of fear from which I might never escape. Hey everyone! If you enjoyed the stories, leave a comment. Your feedback is really important to us. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. It really helps the channel. Thank you for watching.